For me, computer-assisted language learning incorporates all of those things. Do we even need to learn languages anymore? And the question is, how do you go further than that? Duolingo, for example, it only takes you so far. I've never really seen that translated very well into apps. Like, they actually track learners, and they're tracking massive cohorts of learners as well. So any way that you can use technology to increase learners' exposure to input is really critical. To develop models of kind of the ideal learning path, and therefore to better adapt their materials to individual learners. Techniques that have come about through artificial intelligence. And more interesting ways to enhance content, which might help to better represent subject knowledge, and apps that support learners to learn independently, but also technologies that might help them to learn in groups. Ideal language instruction would incorporate a variety of tools. There is much more, or there are many more ways in which computers can support language learning.
Tutor and Tech. Project about teaching languages, learning, technology, and how they co-evolve together.
Hello everybody, this is Tutor and Tech. A project about teaching languages, learning languages, and technology, how they co-evolve together. My name is Dima Basenka. I'm author of the project, host, and also co-creator of product WOOR, WOOR, vocabulary for intermediate plus language learners. You can check it out at woor.app or woorapp.com. And here with me today is Zoe Handley. Hi, Zoe.
Hi, thank you for inviting me.
Thanks a lot. Very happy to have you here. First, I wanted to try to introduce you.
I have a background, so I had an undergraduate degree in French language technology, so I have experience learning through technology at undergraduate level, and then I carried on to do research. So I think you've mentioned a few of the places that I've worked at: the University of Nottingham, but also I worked with Oxford University Press, so at Oxford University. So it was a project driven by Oxford University Press, who were looking to develop apps or applications of technology for language learning in some of their markets. So I've been a learner, learning through technology, and so have some experience of the history of the use of technology in language learning, but I'm also researching it. And in particular, I researched speech technologies when they came to the fore in the early 2000s. And so it's really interesting to see those kind of how the technology has come along now with the developments in AI and large language models as well.
Yeah, I think they are now sort of getting their place in experience of language learners, right? That's the time when they can actually regular people can use it in their learning. I also saw that this year you had a couple of publications, but I'm just going to mention it and we can discuss later. But that's pretty interesting. The first one is exploring AI role in language education, and the second one has artificial intelligence rendered language teaching obsolete. So it's quite teasing title. I think closer to the end of our conversation, that would be pretty interesting to touch on that as well and discuss. You also mentioned that you learned French. How much do you think learning non-native language is necessary or important for people's ability to teach a language?
So I thought the question was going somewhere else, actually, saying, do we need to learn languages these days, even though we have AI? So on that case, I would certainly say that we still need to be learning languages. AI hasn't completely replaced that. In terms of being able to teach, I personally feel that learning a skill yourself is really important, because that does have a real influence on how you come to teach. So actually, if you look at the research on teacher education, so I'm interested in how teachers might deploy technology to support language learning and teaching, or other subjects, that actually when you look at the broader literature on teacher education, that no matter what training you give teachers, actually they tend to rely quite heavily on their own experiences and what worked for them. So for myself as a language learner, I'd be thinking about, well, how can you learn a lot of vocabulary and a lot of sort of chunks of phrases? If you can learn and master a lot of that, then you've got enough to be able to go and benefit from conversing with people in the real world to further develop your language knowledge.
Yeah, that's interesting how sort of empathy or own experience is important, that we discussed this topic surprisingly with Zada guest yesterday. Speaking about computer assisted language learning, I wanted to ask first, especially that I think it might be not super clear right away to everybody. How do you define computer assisted in the computer assisted language learning, or like technological part in that? What is that?
So I guess the range of ways in which computers could be used to support language learning have evolved over the sort of history of developments in computer technology. For me, computer-assisted language learning incorporates all of those things. Originally, I would have said computer-assisted language learning is more akin to kind of using the computer to do drills. So to repeatedly do exercises in a behavioristic kind of way. And for some, that might be what computer-assisted language learning is. And particularly if you're, it's very much what other apps might do, like very popular apps like Duolingo, Quizlet, some of these kind of apps where you've got flashcard apps. They use this very behavioristic approach, but there is much more, or there are many more ways in which computers can support language learning. So in terms of the history of language learning, I would say we've moved from behavioristic call, where it's about doing drills, about doing lots of vocabulary and grammar exercises repeatedly, then moved through multimedia call. So if you remember, originally computers were kind of green screen, the graphics weren't very interesting. We've moved on to multimedia, and the nature of multimedia has, I guess, it's got more and more interesting ways to enhance content, which might help to better represent subject knowledge, or when you're learning a language, to represent vocabulary, or to represent kind of grammar, or to provide scenarios to practice your language. So we've kind of moved through behavioristic into multimedia call, and then into what they call communicative call. So communicative call being computer-assisted language learning, where you use applications such as computer-mediated communication. So your instant messaging apps, your video conferencing apps, things like Zoom, Skype, to engage learners in real communication. And then that kind of moved on from there to what they call integrative call, which is using a variety of different applications and resources to allow learners to engage in, to engage a variety of skills. So to do reading, and that reading then be a stimulus for a speaking task. So for me, computer-assisted language learning, that encompasses any kind of use of technology that might support language learning, not just kind of apps that support learners to learn independently, but also technologies that might help them to learn in groups with teacher facilitation, for example. So I'm not thinking about what you'd call computer-assisted instruction, which is where the computer is replacing the tutor. For me, ideally, the ideal language instruction would incorporate a variety of tools, because these different tools, each tool is best suited to the teaching of different kind of skills and areas of knowledge. So if you're looking at teaching areas of knowledge like vocabulary, like pronunciation, you might be looking at a more behavioristic tool that's giving drill and practice, like Ver, like Duolingo, like pronunciation tools that are out there. But if you're moving towards teaching skills, then you might be looking at using a variety of different applications, communications applications, collaboration tools, and things like that.
Would it be correct to say that behavioristic tools, they are more for independent learning, and other things more assisted learning?
I wouldn't probably make a distinction between aided and assisted. Those are murky terms. If you're thinking about computer-aided instruction, these kind of intelligent tutors, your more behavioristic call, those things learners can do independently. And if you're a classroom instructor, I think you can really harness those tools to get students to use them outside the classroom, so that then when they're in the classroom, they can make more use of what you can do face to face, engaging in discussions, input from the tutor. That's not to say, though, that the other tools can't be used autonomously outside the classroom. So you can, I know there are tools, there are apps like Hello Talk and other apps where learners can engage in conversation practice by engaging in what they call language exchanges. So effectively, these are kind of like social platforms for language learners where they can build their networks of learners, or learners, maybe they're a native speaker of the language that they want to learn, and have an exchange with that learner or a group of learners. And so you can use these communication tools for autonomous learning as well. But I think if you're going to use those tools, you need a minimum threshold level of language to really get the benefits from those exchanges.
Regarding computer-assisted language learning, what do you think were the main things which changed in the field within the last 5-10 years?
So social media and wikis have been about probably for 10 years. Those have continued to have an influence. I would say it's the AI that has made a big change, so artificial intelligence. But I'm thinking here not just about things like ChatGPT, but I'm also thinking about machine translation. Machine translation's been around for many, many years. So as a language learner, we used machine translation, and we were educated about how you could use these tools as productivity tools and how you might use them in your future career, maybe as a translator. But those tools have really increased in terms of the quality of the outputs that they produce. And so in terms of language learning, there's this big question of, do we even need to learn languages anymore? Can these tools be used to replace language learning? Or at least, most people who are going to go and say be a tourist, and they're not going to use language in their everyday lives and for their jobs, do they really need to use do they really need to learn a language? You can get tools on, apps that will you can take a picture of the menu and it automatically translates it. You can even now get it to do kind of simultaneous translation, so to translate like oral language as well. So I think those I see as major changes that have impacted on whether people see language learning as something that we really need. I think if you're going beyond just traveling abroad for leisure, then you still do need to learn a language. These tools do not understand. They're based on statistical models of which word is most likely to follow the preceding word, effectively at the source of it. So they don't understand. They cannot translate nuances. When you're generating texts, there will be infelicities, there will be inaccuracies, or what they call hallucinations. That's obviously the negative side of things. I do, however, on the positive side, feel that these tools could be harnessed to create tools for learning. So there's quite a long history of speech technologies being used to develop automated reading tutors, to automatically evaluate the quality of learners' speech, to create interactive like chat environments so that you can have simulated conversations with a native speaker. So that really would be where I see kind of the latest developments in this area.
Yeah, those things are amazing. I know that there are a lot of new things which are, flashy. They try to market themselves pretty aggressively, but some things are truly amazing. Like the other day, I think I was watching the interview with President Zelensky from Ukraine, and what they did was automatic voiceover in different languages. So they were talking I think in English, but it was automatically translated to Ukrainian and Russian right away in their own voice.
Yeah, and this is a real kind of advance. So actually, one of the things I don't think we mentioned in kind of my career path is I did actually work at Toshiba developing in-car navigation systems for a while, and I was very much responsible for the dictionaries. And it was very clear then in the sort of mid-2000s that there were significant limitations to these technologies. So just if you focus on one language and the ability, say, to recognize English, it was restricted in the range of accents in particular, because this is in part due to the training data. So to make these technologies work really well, you need a lot of training data, and that needs to represent the diversity in speakers. So that's, one of the reasons that AI has really, really improved recently is that availability of data, because we're all generating data on social media. We're all generating, they're probably recording our Zoom conversations and using that to bootstrap these models. So that's why we've got so much better sort of AI technologies for generating text, for speaking, for speech recognition these days.
Yeah, it's a lot of things which are booming right now might not be very new for you. I sense that you might have already worked with something years ago, and now it just gets its sort of first or second life just because technology which is underneath it becomes sophisticated enough to be able to do it, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I was doing on my PhD was looking at speech synthesis for language learning. Similarly, there were some of the conversational applications, but back then in late 90s, early 2000s, these tended to be branching dialogues, so not open dialogues. I'm now aware of companies that are trying to develop open software for simulated open dialogues, the sorts of things that aren't taught on language courses, and actually the international students who come and study with us, they find most difficult. And so there's a possibility that we might be able to provide kind of simulated support that then makes them more confident to benefit from the learning experiences when they do come and study abroad.
Let's try to talk a little bit about how teachers can use technology in their practice. So, for example, I am a teacher or tutor, and for example, I don't use any technological solutions in my practice. What would you recommend me to start doing in class and try to offer my students to use also outside of class to support their learning? What should I start from if I don't use anything now?
So I guess I would certainly be starting with the kind of drill and practice applications. So anything with kind of flashcards, spaced practice, the sort of thing that you're doing with the Word app, the sort of things you can do with Duolingo, that essentially that they take a lot of time in order to develop the sort of the foundational knowledge to then be able to engage in oral communication or to write longer text. You need a lot of practice in vocabulary, in pronunciation, in grammar. And so the most effective way would be to actually introduce in class your learners to these technologies, and then to expect them to be using them out of class. Ideally, you'd have some sort of teacher interface where you can enroll all of your learners and you can track the extent to which they are engaging in this practice, so that then you can tailor the instruction that you engage in class to where your learners are at, and you can use the classroom time for the more kind of interactive activities where your learners would benefit from interacting with one another and from teacher support. So that's where I would start, but obviously that you can do many more interesting things as well with technology.
Yeah, this is very interesting. I'm not sure that this is 100% what you meant, but I also hear it from time to time that it is very important to be exposed to language a lot. And it feels like it is necessary part of language learning to be exposed to those applications because time in class is limited, right? And to be able to progress, language needs to be in people's life beyond the class. Using different applications as a version of a technology in this sense can be, if not necessary, then helpful to support this learning
Yeah, absolutely.
process.
I mean, all theories of language learning would suggest that input, exposure to the target language is critical. That's why, to develop the highest levels of proficiency, learners tend to study abroad. So any way that you can use technology to increase learners' exposure to input is really critical. And they do need repeated exposure as well. And so that's where kind of drill and practice apps come in. But But also, obviously, the internet broadly offers access to a wide variety of authentic input. So just reading kind of websites, but also you've got YouTube. There are some sort of apps that harness, for example, YouTube videos in a particular language, and use AI tools to analyze them, to extract particular videos that have, say, examples of the pronunciation of a particular word, and things like that, as well as just simply providing learners access to a huge variety of authentic material.
Is there any advice which can help people to navigate this sort of abundance of different products available? How to choose the right ones and how to be able to focus and not be overwhelmed?
I think that is the biggest problem for a teacher, is making those decisions. And actually something that's kind of focus of research that I'm currently trying to develop is trying to think about how can we support teachers to make those decisions. Fundamentally, I think the teacher needs to start from thinking about, well, what are their learning goals? And from their understanding of theories of learning and pedagogy, what are the best ways, what processes do learners need to engage in, or how do we need to represent content in order for learners to acquire that knowledge or that skill? And then to basically, from that, they've got a list of criteria. This is what the app needs to do if the learners are going to acquire that skill or knowledge. I guess you could do effectiveness studies, so experiments to find out which app is better. The problem is there is a proliferation. A new app comes on the market every and not if every day, but there are so many. Teachers need to be able to make those decisions for themselves. The other thing, obviously, is they can look at the documentation from the apps that they're looking at, and I'd be looking for ones that talk about the underlying pedagogy, that talk in the language that they were trained in as well. They're trained in pedagogy theories of learning. Do the makers of these apps talk about those things? Historically, they didn't. So at least 10 years ago, if you went to a trade fair, app developers or people marketing these products wouldn't be able to talk about the theories of learning that underpin them, or the evidence they've got that these technologies are effective. Today, however, you will find much more of that. And I know that there are organizations that are trying to kind of develop frameworks of kind of what is the minimum information that an educator or someone in a school who is purchasing these technologies needs to know in order to make those decisions. It's certainly an area that the British Department for Education is working on, and I've seen the EU projects are working on that as well.
And what would you say if I am already past my beginner's level and I'm, say, at intermediate or upper intermediate level? What would you advise me as a strategy to use technology to progress further to advanced level?
Yeah, it's tricky there. I think I would be thinking about some of those language exchange apps like Hello Talk, so opportunities to engage with others in the target language. The other thing I did see, so I think you're talking about kind of how Duolingo, for example, it only takes you so far, because it's this drill and practice in vocabulary and grammar. At least that's at the core of it. And the question is, how do you go further than that? If I design something, what I would be doing is trying to take, say, YouTube videos and to actually grade them. So to use AI technologies or natural language processing technologies to understand what's the content, and then to actually grade the content. So based on kind of the vocabulary coverage in them, and maybe to group them by theme, and then to have your learner kind of do a test of their initial vocabulary knowledge, and then based on that to recommend them videos that meet their level. And then you could kind of, as they've been exposed to more language through those videos, then give them videos that are at a higher level and that incorporate a wider range of vocabulary. If you integrate that with some activities that could kind of test their knowledge, then that could help you to kind of adapt to the videos that you offer to the level of the learner. I did see something where kind of there was an kind of add-on for Netflix that did something similar to this. And there is research on kind of the idea of making like a reading ladder out of, say, blog posts or other media that are available on the internet.
Do you think that historically there are principles which are rooted in computer-assisted language learning, which are used well by applications or tools available on the market, and those which are not yet used well?
So the drill and practice using the spaced learning, the repetitive practice, spacing learning, I think that's all been really well embedded into apps that we see today that are very popular. There's some areas of speech technology. So what was really interesting in the sort of late 90s, early 2000s is beyond speech synthesis and speech recognition, some work was looking at how you could represent speech in ways, sort of visualizations that would support learning. I've never really seen that translated very well into apps. I think that would be something really interesting to see. I think what I just talked about, the idea that we could kind of go beyond sort of basic vocabulary and grammar and harness natural language processing to, in the same way that maybe when you were young, you learnt to read and you'd read with graded readers. So books that only had a certain level of vocabulary and gradually they became more complex. You could use authentic materials and so authentic videos or authentic text and use algorithms to grade those. So that's something I think that the technology is there now to do. Conversational practice, though, I think that's where really the technology is now there to offer this in a way that it wasn't 20 years ago.
So it is conversational practice. It is ability to sort of grade and offer progressive complexity.
I haven't mentioned learning analytics. So obviously, one of the things that intelligent tutors or apps like Duolingo integrate today is that they actually track learners, and they're tracking massive cohorts of learners as well. So this allows them to develop models of kind of the ideal learning path and therefore to better adapt their materials to individual learners. And not just adapt the materials, but maybe adapt motivational messages to the individual learner. So I think the learning analytics, all of this, though, it's underpinned by machine learning techniques that have come about through artificial intelligence.
Yeah. Speaking of artificial intelligence and also place of people in teaching languages, what parts of teaching do you think AI is going to take over first?
Well, the drill and practice, effectively. Anything that's repeated practice, that's where the AI is going to support. Possibly feedback. So thinking about feedback on written work. And so we've got, large language models are going to be particularly good at knowing what is typical of good writing. And so being able to provide automated feedback on writing. It's not going to replace the human element. We need to remember that teaching is not just about the activities, but it's about managing the individual learner's motivation and their engagement, where technology can help. Technology could be a bridge. I think thinking about how engaging in instant messaging, even if it's by text, actually that could be a bridge that sort of dials down learners' anxieties and is a bridge to them engaging in oral interaction. Yeah, thinking about ways that technology can bridge to real world language use. I think that's also a really important benefit of technology.
That is almost all questions which I had, and I have the last one. And it's kind of a regular. Do you think that AI eventually gonna completely substitute teachers and tutors?
I personally doubt it. But that's within my current understanding that these technologies, they don't understand. They are based on statistical models, and those statistical models, you could claim that we learn like a model does, that there are certainly theories of learning that we kind of process language or our other senses in that way. But unless you can feed a model with all of the senses and the richness of input that an individual has, I personally can't see it. I think AI is going to be very good at certain tasks, and some tasks it's going to be better than humans, but there are things that are unique being a human that AI is certainly not going to replace. Certainly that human element, that counseling knowledge, but equally truly understanding the world, it's not there, and I don't anticipate it being there yet. So for me, I should probably clarify that it might appear to understand, But that, for me, is just an illusion of the fact that it is now able to not just say, well, if I've got this word, then this word's likely to come next. It's if this word occurs, then this word's going to occur 3 paragraphs along. And so that gives you an illusion, because it knows that certain words co-occur, that it has an understanding of the world. But that's not encoded. It doesn't truly understand. At least that's my position on it anyway.
Nice. Yeah, I guess at what extent it's gonna replace or take place in the language learning process, we're gonna wait and see.
Absolutely.
Thanks a lot. And maybe in the end, I also wanted to ask if there are any plans, programs, or how people who might want to get into contact with you, or anything that you might want to share with people who listen or watch.
Yeah, so I think we've talked about the kind of research that I do, but also we're launching a program at the University of York. So a master's program, not just on language learning, but on educational technology more broadly. It very much focuses on the issues that we've talked about today. So the programs for educators, but also it could be of benefit for people who are developing educational apps. And the idea of the program is to provide students a foundation in educational theory, and then to think about how and what we know about learning, how that might be enhanced through the use of technology. So how technology can be used to engage learners in the processes that we know support learning. So that's something that we're launching here in York in September 2025. So we're recruiting students now for that. I also supervise lots of PhD students in this area as well. So yeah, that's just some of the projects that I'm working on, as well as the kind of the research on sort of the effectiveness of different technologies, which is kind of what we've talked around today.
Nice, that sounds interesting. And if somebody is interested, how they can find it?
So, well, just Google University of York and the MA in Artificial Intelligence and Technology Enhanced Learning. They're also welcome to email me directly. So Zoe Handley at york.ac.uk. I'm sure you'll put those information sort of in text next to recording as well.
Yes. Nice. Thanks a lot, Zoe. It was pleasure talking to you. Thanks a lot for joining, sharing your experience.
No problem. Thank you.
Tutor Tech. Project about teaching languages, learning, technology, and how they co-evolve together.